The sky is iron, the winds slice like knives. You are a human, but not as we know today. You wear the skins of wolves. You have no home, only a cave, and you haven't eaten in 3 days. Your children are sleeping under animal pelts. Their breath is shallow. Outside, the snow is so thick you can't see your own hands. No crops, no firewood left, no game for miles. And yet, you survive. Not just this night, but the whole brutal season. Esau. This is not just a survival story. It's a journey into the deep ingenuity of early humans, the dark hunger of Ice Age winters, and the evolutionary roots of our diets today. You'll discover that cavemen didn't live off mammoths alone, and that their survival wasn't just about food. It was about ritual, risk, planning, and an astonishing relationship with nature. In this documentary, we'll enter caves blackened by firelight, walk on frozen tundra, and open the last buried food cache of a 20,000-year-old winter. This is the real paleo diet, not what influencers say, but what survival demanded. The cold wasn't a season, it was a sentence. 20,000 years ago, winter didn't arrive politely. It didn't knock at the door or whisper through trees. It consumed. The sun dipped lower in the sky and forgot how to rise. Ice crawled down from the poles like slow, unstoppable fingers, turning continents into kingdoms of silence and frost. Europe, Siberia, most of North America buried beneath miles of glacial weight. No soil, no color, just white, wind, and waiting. For the people who lived through this time, if lived is even the right word, winter wasn't something you endured. It was something you outsmarted, outsuffered, outsurvived. This wasn't winter as we know it, a few difficult months, then the promise of spring. In the late Pleistocene, winter could stretch 8 months long. Some years it never truly ended. A short summer might come, melting the top layer of ice just enough to trick green things into growing. But then came the fall, and then came the silence again. And with it, hunger. To understand what early humans ate, we first have to understand what they were up against. Imagine this, you're standing on a treeless plain, not grassland, this is tundra. The ground is frozen solid beneath your feet. The air is dry, biting, almost hollow. The wind never stops. It isn't the stormy, dramatic wind of modern winter, it's worse. It's thinner, constant, relentless. It whispers across the landscape like something trying to erase everything it touches. The light is low, even at midday. The sky hangs gray and featureless. You haven't seen the sun properly in weeks, maybe months. And when it does appear, it doesn't warm you. It only reminds you how far away it really is. This is the Ice Age, but don't think of it as one frozen moment. Think of it as an era of long, oscillating hells. Periods of brief thaw followed by brutal cold, unpredictable and uneven. In some years, food was more plentiful, herds roamed further north, rivers ran deep with fish. But when the climate turned, and it always did, animals vanished. Trees withered. Lakes froze so solid birds could walk across them. And the humans, they adapted, but not easily. Every winter was a gauntlet, a test of what could be endured, what could be stored, and what you were willing to do to make it through the next sunrise. The most basic human need to eat became an elaborate seasonal gamble. In summer, the land breathed. Animals returned. Plants budded, if briefly. This was the time to gather, kill, store, hide. Because winter didn't just test your hunger, it tested your memory, your foresight, your ability to think in months, not meals. Unlike today, food wasn't a daily guarantee. It came in floods and famines. One week, your group might take down a bison or stumble on a cache of fatty roots. The next, there's nothing but brittle ice and the bones of what you didn't finish last year. And so early humans developed a rhythm that most of us have forgotten: seasonal scarcity. Our ancestors didn't eat 3 meals a day. They didn't snack. There was no breakfast. There was no food schedule. There were only feast days and hunger weeks. You learned to fast not because it was trendy, but because the earth demanded it. You learned to store in pits, in frozen lakes, in your own body. In fact, fat wasn't just energy, it was strategy. The human body became its own emergency ration. In the months leading up to winter, people gained weight deliberately. Every bite of marrow, every sliver of bare fat, it wasn't indulgence. It was insurance. Then came the dark months when that weight melted away, metabolized for warmth and thought. Some researchers believe early humans lost as much as 20% of their body weight every winter. They weren't dieting, they were surviving. The concept of hunger changes in a world like this. It stops being discomfort. It becomes a presence, a voice. It sharpens your senses, makes you cruel or clever. It's there when you wake, when you walk, when you sleep. It drives migration, art, sacrifice. And above all, it teaches restraint. Because if you ate too much too early, if you feasted on the last of the dried meat in December, there was nothing left for February. And February was when the wolves came. Not just the wolves with teeth, the wolves inside, cold, starvation, and despair. And still people endured. Not because they were stronger than us or more savage, but because they had no choice. Survival meant adaptation, not just biologically but socially. You shared what you had. You remembered who owed who meat. You buried bones as signals. You passed down stories of the years the sun didn't rise, of the herds that vanished, of the last child born before the storm. This chapter of humanity, the Pleistocene struggle, etched itself into our DNA. Our cravings for sugar, for fat, our celebration of abundance. Even our deepest holidays, harvest festivals, winter solstice feasts, are echoes of the hunger that came before us. And when we talk about what cavemen actually ate, we're not just talking about ingredients. We're talking about choices made under pressure, rituals carved from desperation, ingenuity born of necessity. Food wasn't fuel, it was fate. And that fate began with the hunt. Because no matter how cleverly you preserved roots or fermented grains, nothing got you through an 8-month winter quite like one final, perfect kill. The sky is the color of ash, and the air smells like iron and wet stone. Somewhere ahead, just over the ridge, the herd gathers. Their breath rises like steam into the thinning light. Reindeer, maybe, or something older, mammoth, steppe bison, elk the size of minivans, their hooves crunching frost-laced grass that hasn't felt the warmth of sun in weeks. They've come here like they always do, drawn to the same windswept pass, the last place with shallow snow, the last chance to graze before the world disappears under white. And crouched behind a rise of broken limestone, breath held, Muscles taut, a hunting party waits. 6 men, 2 women, 1 adolescent with eyes wide from the cold and the stakes. They haven't eaten well in a week, not truly. A few smoked hare bones, some dried tuber, a pouch of rendered fat mostly for the children and elders. But this is the hunt they've been planning since late summer. The final kill before the snow buries everything they can't carry home. The animals are spooked. They always are this time of year, fattened, restless, sensing the season's turn. They move in tight clusters, ears twitching, eyes scanning. One wrong noise, one missed signal, and the whole herd will stampede. And then the humans will be left with nothing but footprints. But this isn't their first hunt. These are not brutes or grunting savages. These are strategists, observers, predators who have watched every migration, learned every blind spot in the land. The plan unfolds like it has 100 times before. A slow, silent curve around the herd, wind in their favor. A sudden bluff on one side, the only escape route. And then, the rush. A scream, a stamp of feet, the pounding of blood in ears. Javelins soar, fire-hardened shafts tipped with stone and bone. Some strike, others don't. But in the chaos, one reindeer breaks its pattern. It turns, slips, falls. In a blink, it's surrounded. Hands grip stone blades. A flint axe swings low. One man is knocked over, his cheek sliced by an antler. Another takes a kick to the ribs, but the kill is done. The animal twitches, breathes its last. There's no celebration, no wild cheering, only silence. Because this is more than a hunt, it's a contract with winter. What happens next is a different kind of ritual, not one of adrenaline, but of urgency. The carcass weighs hundreds of pounds. The sun is dipping lower, and every moment they linger, the cold creeps deeper into their fingers, their bones, their future. They work fast. Tendons severed, hide flayed, the belly opened. Blood steams into the icy ground. They know exactly where to cut the fat-laden hump near the shoulders, the thickest organs, the marrow-rich bones. Nothing is wasted. The stomach is removed carefully. It might be used to store broth or berries. The bladder could hold fat. The sinew will be stripped and dried for thread. The tongue, liver, and heart are precious. Often eaten first, shared immediately, sometimes raw, not out of savagery, but necessity. They are the warmest parts, still full of heat and salt. The rest is packed onto sleds of bone and branch, or wrapped in hide and dragged. A journey back to the camp begins, maybe a cave, maybe a ring of mammoth bones on a hill. They have hours, maybe less. The snow is starting again. But the real work has only just begun. Because now comes the question every Ice Age tribe must face. How do you stop a feast from becoming a funeral? This one kill, maybe 600, 800 pounds of usable meat, could feed 20 people for weeks. If it doesn't rot, if scavengers don't get to it, if time, the cruelest element of all, doesn't turn it into poison. And so, ancient humans developed what might be their greatest, quietest invention: preservation. First comes drying. Thin strips of meat are sliced and hung over racks, either near a fire or simply exposed to the wind. The cold air, dry as bone, sucks out moisture like a sponge. In less than a day, the flesh turns dark and leathery. It will last for months longer if kept in sealed hide pouches with fat. If firewood is abundant, they might smoke the meat instead. Low flames, thick bark, slow hours of tending. Smoke carries phenols and acids, natural antimicrobials that coat the meat and make it unpalatable to bacteria. This isn't just cooking, it's chemistry born from desperation. Organs and high-fat cuts, too delicate to dry, are rendered, chopped, simmered, filtered. The fat that rises, yellow, rich, life-saving, is collected and cooled into cakes or stored in rawhide sacks. Sometimes it's mixed with berries or ground bone to make pemmican, a prehistoric protein bar so dense and caloric, a handful could fuel a day of trekking through snow. And then there's the oldest preservation technique of all, the cold itself. If temperatures drop fast enough, and they usually do, large chunks of meat are buried in pits and left to freeze solid. Some are sealed with stones or snow, marked by bone totems to keep scavengers away. The first natural freezer. But this method comes with a cost. You can't access this food easily. You're gambling that when you return, it'll still be there. That the wolves, the four-legged and the two-legged, haven't found it first. There's a tension in this moment, a kind of ancient anxiety, because early humans lived with the knowledge that food was only food if you could keep it. One miscalculation, a thaw, a leak, a bear, and your entire winter store could vanish in a day. And yet, despite all this, they managed. They built systems. They passed down methods. Grandparents taught children how to recognize spoiled marrow by smell alone. Tribes developed taboos around certain meats during certain moons. Social structures were built around who owned which preserved stores, who had claim to the bones, who could be trusted with the rendered fat. Because food was not just survival, it was social glue. It created alliances, sparked betrayals, defined leaders. And all of it, every technique, every ritual, every innovation began with this moment. A kill made under gray skies, on the cusp of a season that did not forgive. The carcass has been stripped, the fire is low. The meat smokes quietly in the cold dusk. In the distance, wolves howl, always circling, always watching. But for now, there is food. There is a chance. And tomorrow, with any luck, there will still be meat to bury and mouths to feed. In our world today, fat is a word coded in shame, something to be trimmed, hidden, counted. But to our Ice Age ancestors, fat wasn't a problem. It was a prize. It meant the difference between waking up in the spring or never waking at all. Because when winter stripped the earth of color, when roots vanished beneath permafrost and game grew scarce, fat was life. More than just food, it was energy in its most portable, potent form. A biological currency hoarded, hunted, worshipped. Let's go back. Picture a human body crouched in the glow of a fire, wind howling through the cracks of a mammoth bone hut. The temperature outside is 30 below. There is no bread, no fruit, no rice, no sugars of any kind. What fuels that body? Fat. Ounce for ounce, fat contains more than twice the calories of protein or carbohydrates. Where sugar burns like kindling, fat burns like oak, slow, steady, and sustaining. It fuels your brain, insulates your organs, and perhaps most importantly in the cold, keeps your metabolism firing long after your last bite of meat. In the deep winter, when calories are scarce and the hunting has slowed, early humans enter a kind of controlled starvation state. But it's not chaos, it's chemistry. Their bodies begin to switch fuel sources, breaking down stored fat, both from previous meals and from their own bodies. This process, called ketogenesis, creates ketone bodies, molecules that nourish the brain even in the absence of carbs. It's the ancient human equivalent of a backup generator, one evolution hardwired into us after millennia of famine and frost. And this is why fat wasn't just preferred, it was pursued, hunted, stockpiled, shared carefully, stolen in desperation. In fact, if you gave a starving hunter in January the choice between 10 pounds of lean rabbit meat or 2 pounds of animal fat, they'd take the fat without hesitation. Because here's the brutal truth: lean protein can kill you. There's a phenomenon modern scientists call rabbit starvation. It happens when a person eats high quantities of very lean meat like rabbit without any accompanying fat. At first, you feel full, satiated, but the body can't run on protein alone. Over time, you become nauseous, weak. Your liver can't process the excess nitrogen. Your energy collapses, and if the imbalance continues, you die full but starving. Indigenous Arctic cultures knew this long before science gave it a name. So did Paleolithic tribes. They learned to avoid lean kills in the winter, favoring older, fatter animals even if they were harder to hunt. They passed down warnings. They boiled bones for fat-rich broth. They rationed every gram of tallow like it was gold. And they got creative. Over generations, our ancestors developed one of the most ingenious survival foods in human history. A dense, fat-based ration that could last for months without spoiling. A food so packed with calories, so stable and so efficient, it would be used by Native Americans, polar explorers, and frontiersmen thousands of years later. We call it pemmican. Imagine this: a mixture of dried, pulverized meat, usually bison or elk, mixed with rendered fat and sometimes berries. It was lightweight, durable, and required no cooking. In the frozen air of the Pleistocene, it could last half a year or more. And it wasn't just backup food. It was survival strategy in edible form. To make it, hunters would first strip meat into thin slices and dry it until it became brittle. They'd then pound it into a fine powder or shred it into fibers. Meanwhile, the animal's fat, often from the back, kidneys, or bone marrow, was slowly melted over fire into tallow. When combined in the right ratios and stored in hide containers or bladders, the result was a shelf-stable, calorie-dense cake of raw power. 1 pound of pemmican could contain up to 3,500 calories. That's a day's worth of energy in your hand. No fire needed, no cooking, no risk. But beyond its utility, pemmican represents something deeper, an early human understanding of biochemical truth, that the human body isn't just hungry for food, it's hungry for the right kind of food. Fat wasn't filler, it was fuel. Clean burning, long-lasting, deeply nourishing. And different fats served different roles. Marrow, for instance, was a sacred prize. Early humans broke bones, often with tools specifically designed for it, not for the meat, but for what was hidden inside. Bone marrow is rich in lipids, iron, and fat-soluble vitamins. It's soft, digestible even for the elderly and sick, and often consumed raw in the field immediately after a kill. Organ fat, especially from kidneys and hearts, was reserved for special members of the group: the pregnant, the elders, the hunters most in need of strength. These fats weren't just calorie sources. They were seen as spiritual and vital essences of the animal's life force. Then there was subcutaneous fat, the white, thick layers beneath the hide. In colder months, animals stored more of it, and hunters learned to track which seasons, which herds, which individual animals were the richest in the fat they needed most. And finally, rendered fat, tallow from herbivores, lard from carnivores, even seal or whale blubber in coastal groups became a kind of edible currency. Melted, stored, carried in skin sacks, spread on dried meat, mixed with roots or berries into paste, burned in lamps, used to waterproof clothing. It was, quite literally, everything. We often imagine cavemen obsessed with fire or weapons or shelter. But more than any of those, they were obsessed with fat. Because to them, fat wasn't just about eating. It was about thinking, moving, staying warm, dreaming, waking up the next day. And that obsession didn't vanish. Even today, our brains still 60% fat, remember. We crave fat because it once saved us. We store it because our ancestors had to. Our entire metabolic design, from how we absorb nutrients to how we fast during sleep, was forged in a world where the right fat at the right time meant the difference between lineage and extinction. So when we bite into a fatty cut of meat, or when our bodies melt their own reserves to carry us through illness or fasting, we're living echoes of that ancient equation. Fat is not the enemy. It is the code, the key, the signal fire in the snow. And for Ice Age humans, mastering that code wasn't a diet. It was destiny. Buried beneath frost and silence, a bone juts out from the snow, weathered, sharp, and strangely placed. Not natural, not random, a marker. To a modern eye, it's easy to miss. Just debris on the tundra. But to the people who lived here 20,000 years ago, this was a promise, a map, a lifeline hidden in the cold. Because when Ice Age humans hunted more than they could carry, they didn't just feast and forget. They cached. They took what they couldn't eat, the meat, the fat, the marrow-rich bones, and they hid it, carefully, deliberately, in pits cut into the frozen earth, in glacial cracks, in deep snowbanks and permafrost hollows, preserved not by fire or smoke, but by the cold itself, an unrelenting deep freeze that stretched from Siberia to Spain. These weren't random leftovers. They were strategic deposits, survival bank accounts buried in bone and ice. Some were meant for a return in days, others for weeks, and some, perhaps never meant for the original hunter at all. Archaeologists have found them, caches sealed in ice for tens of thousands of years. In the Yana site of northeastern Siberia, researchers uncovered mammoth bones deliberately stacked and scored with cuts, clearly butchered, then buried. In Alaska, entire pits have been discovered filled with caribou haunches wrapped in hide and sealed with stones, placed below the frost line. And in the caves of southern France, caches of dried or smoked meat were stashed in deep cracks, alongside tools and ash, carefully tucked away for a future that could not be guaranteed. Sometimes these sites are ringed with sharpened sticks, sometimes with upright stones or bones from previous kills placed in unnatural poses, not decoration but deterrence, warning signs to wolves and perhaps to rival humans. This is claimed. This is ours. In one French cave system, excavators discovered a deep niche lined with slate and capped with flat stones. Inside, marrow bones, cracked but not eaten, stored like valuables. The people who placed them there were long gone. Maybe they starved before returning. Maybe they migrated and never looked back. But what remained was unmistakable, a message sent forward in time. A whisper from one winter to the next. This practice, caching, required more than intelligence. It demanded faith. Faith that the snow wouldn't shift too much, that animals wouldn't dig it up, that the cold would hold, that the bone marker would still be visible under 5 feet of new powder. Most of all, it was a faith in memory, in direction, in future return. And that kind of planning, that's not animal instinct. That's culture, civilization in embryo. Because caching is not just about storing food. It's about believing you will be alive to find it. Imagine the emotional weight of that. You bury a haunch of elk wrapped in hide, sealed with stones. You mark the spot with a carved femur stuck upright in the frost. Your child helps you. You tell her, if we cannot hunt in the next moon, we come here. If I do not return, you bring your mother. You feed your brother. That's not survival. That's inheritance. And this trust between present and future, between ancestors and descendants, rippled through Ice Age life. In some caches, archaeologists have found not just food but tools, stone knives, fire drills, baskets of flint nodules, as if the site itself was a kit, a survival module prepped for emergencies. One cache in Siberia even included woven grass ropes and a preserved torch. Not just food, but the means to use it, to defend it, to carry it away. And some of these caches were booby-trapped in the simplest but most effective ways. Hides soaked in bitter plant resins that made the meat unpalatable to wolves. Bone pits dug around the site that would collapse under a scavenger's weight. Urine-marked stones to mimic large predators. Primitive, yes, but designed with precision and intent. These people were not only surviving, but thinking ahead of their enemies. Caches weren't just used in the dead of winter. Sometimes they marked migration routes, drops along seasonal paths, laid out like breadcrumbs for the tribe's future movement. A way to lighten the load while still securing calories. In other cases, they were emergency reserves. A failsafe in case of an injury, a failed hunt, or an early thaw. And still, every cache held a terrible gamble. Because returning to a cache that's been raided by beasts, by rival bands, or just by bad luck could mean death. You arrive hungry, weakened, counting on the calories hidden below the ice, and you find a hole. Paw prints. Nothing. The betrayal of time. The cold's cruel joke. But for every failure, there were successes, quiet, invisible victories. The family who made it through the final month on marrow stored weeks before. The lone hunter who stumbled onto an old cache marked by his father years prior. The child who learned where the family's secret stash lay, and carried that knowledge into adulthood. Because caching wasn't just food security, it was memory made physical. It was the landscape becoming a ledger, the ice becoming a vault. It was a way for early humans to say, "We will be here tomorrow." And so they marked the earth not with monuments or flags, but with food. Bone and hide, salt and fat, tallow buried like treasure beneath stone cairns and frost-hardened moss. They built a kind of silent language, a geography of hope, one where survival didn't come from hoarding alone, but from the belief that tomorrow deserved to be fed. And when we find these caches today, unearthed by researchers, gnawed by time but still intact, we're not just uncovering meat. We're uncovering trust, strategy, emotion, a story frozen in the earth, written by hands long gone, addressed to a future that is now our past. It's a myth we love. The meat-clenching caveman, fresh from the hunt, dripping blood and triumph in equal measure. But the truth, as always, is far more complex and far more human. Because when the hunt failed, and it often did, survival didn't lie in glory. It lay underground, under bark, under rot, in things that squirmed, in things that smelled wrong, in roots and grubs and fermentation jars made of hollowed stone. The Ice Age diet was not a celebration of excess. It was a masterclass in adaptation. Let's start at the margins, where frost bit deepest and the mammoths were gone. There, in the bitter edge of winter, early humans turned to the earth itself, not just for shelter, but for food, roots, tubers, bulbs. Things we walk past today without a thought. They dug with bone tools and frozen fingers, sometimes 2 feet beneath the snow. It was hard work. Some of these roots were toxic when raw, like bracken fern rhizomes or cycad tubers. But our ancestors didn't just eat blindly. They learned. They soaked, pounded, leached, roasted. They peeled away the poisons with patience and memory passed down through stories and scars. The yam-like tubers of the Arctic bistort, for instance, became a staple for northern bands, rich in starch, bitter but edible after hours of soaking and slow fire drying. Then there were the nuts. In the caves of the Caucasus, archaeologists found acorns cracked, washed, and stored not just as food, but as a planned seasonal staple. Acorns are rich in tannins, which are toxic in high amounts. But early humans learned to grind them into meal and soak the flour in stream water, sometimes for days. The result? A paste that could be dried, stored, and cooked, a primitive porridge or flatbread base, rich in calories when nothing else remained. And grains. Yes, grains. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found microscopic traces of wild barley and lentils on ancient stone tools, not just scattered but patterned, as if pounded, processed, perhaps even fermented. Fermentation, that beautiful, accidental alchemy, wasn't some Neolithic luxury. It may have roots in the Ice Age itself. In Spain, in the ancient El Cedron cave, Neanderthal dental plaque preserved fragments of wild mushrooms, nuts, and even cooked starches. But what caught scientists' attention was something stranger. Trace compounds typically associated with fermentation, lactic acids and yeast residues. It hinted that even these early cousins may have discovered a truth we're only now beginning to grasp, that rot, done right, becomes preservation. Fermented grains last longer. they become more digestible. The chemical breakdown reduces toxins and increases bioavailability, more nutrients per bite. Whether by design or accident, Ice Age humans were pre-digesting their food with bacteria and fungi they couldn't see but had learned to trust. And then, of course, there were the bugs. Insects aren't fallback food. They're efficient, nutritious, and in many cases strategically harvested. Bone tools with beveled edges found in upper Paleolithic layers across Africa and Europe suggest digging implements for extracting larvae and beetle grubs. Not random, not desperation, deliberate. Insects offer protein and fat. Grubs, especially, are lipid-rich, tiny packets of fat in a season where even fat from game is scarce. Frozen logs were pried open for wood-boring beetle larvae. Ant hills raided for their eggs. Termites smoked from mounds with pine resin. And if that wasn't enough, there was the ultimate gamble: fermented meat. Today, we'd call it disgusting, dangerous. But to Ice Age humans, it was strategy born of necessity. Spoiled meat doesn't always mean deadly meat. In the right conditions, cold, anaerobic, slow decaying, meat can ferment rather than rot. Arctic cultures like the Inuit and Sami still practice this today, burying fish or seal meat in pits to undergo lactic fermentation, then retrieving it weeks or months later. The smell is overwhelming, but the meat becomes softer, more digestible, and crucially preserved without fire or salt. In the Alps, Ötzi the Iceman was found with dried meat and possible signs of aged fat in his stomach. Though younger than the Ice Age, he may represent a lingering echo of this knowledge, that some meat is better after it turns. In Siberian sites, archaeologists have found bones buried near fire pits, not burned but darkened by chemical reactions, as if intentionally aged near warmth, allowed to ferment in the permafrost before final cooking. These weren't mistakes, they were techniques. Because in a world without refrigeration, decay could be a tool. And in the darker corners of that knowledge was a kind of reverence. You didn't just eat the fermented meat raw and alone. You prayed, you tested, you tasted carefully. Some cultures believed the meat spoke through its smell, sharp, sweet, sour, a language of rot. If it turned the wrong way, it was cursed. If it turned right, it was holy. In some ways, this chapter of Ice Age eating is the most intimate. It shows us not just what humans ate, but what they were willing to believe in, that the invisible could help them, that bacteria they could not see were their allies, that what looked ruined might actually be rescued. It's not just survival, it's early science, early risk, early trust. And maybe that's the quiet genius of it all. That beneath the myth of the meat-hungry caveman was a person who knew how to crack a root, soak a nut, ferment a broth, and harvest a grub the size of their thumb, and smile when they found it. A person who looked at the rot and didn't recoil, but leaned in. In the heart of the Ice Age winter, when the winds howled like dying animals and the snow blew sideways across the mouths of caves, the fire was not just heat. It was home. It was memory. It was myth. And around that fire, food became more than food. Here, where every mouthful could mean one more day of life, early humans did something astonishing. They shared. The last successful hunt before the white silence of January, was not hoarded. It was divided, bone by bone, cut by careful cut, a communal act so ancient it predates cities, borders, even language as we know it. Picture it, a mammoth thigh steaming from the fire passed from elder to child, from mother to warrior. A marrow bone cracked and offered to the smallest hands first. The richest fat, so vital, so rare, rendered over coals and spooned with carved bone ladles into waiting mouths. Not a feast, a covenant. Because in the bitterest months, when the mammoth gods did not return and the snow covered every known trail, food had to mean more than calories. It had to mean us. And so it became ritual. Among the ashes of Paleolithic hearths in the Dordogne caves of France, archaeologists have found carefully charred bones, not scorched by accident, but arranged, deliberately placed. Some show signs of being burned not for cooking, but for offering. These weren't scraps. They were sacrifices. Meat and marrow given to the fire, not eaten, but sent away. To who, to what? To the gods of the hunt, to the spirits of the animals, to ancestors who, it was believed, still walked with the living when the cold grew thick. Food in this form was conversation, a language older than words, made of smoke and ash and hunger. In some caves, ground bone dust was found spread near the entrances, mixed with ash, blood, sometimes ochre. A line in the snow, a ward, or perhaps a welcome. The dead, too, were fed. Burials from the Ice Age, like the famous triple burial at Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, show signs of ritual food deposits. Burned grains, pieces of meat, marrow-rich bones laid at the feet of the deceased, perhaps so they would not go hungry in the afterlife, perhaps as tribute, or perhaps because feeding the dead helped the living believe they would be fed in turn. Stories were part of the ritual too, and not just idle tales to pass the time. In winter, storytelling was breath currency, a way to keep language alive when nothing else moved. Around the fire, children learned which animals could be eaten and which could not, which plants cured fever and which caused death, which stars meant the herds would return. Myths were survival manuals, wrapped in metaphor, sung into being by flickering firelight and half-empty stomachs. And those stories were paired with food. The first bite went with the first word, the cracking of bones timed with the climax of a tale. It was a choreography, ancestral, intimate, passed from frostbitten lips to frostbitten ears. In some bands, the act of eating was itself a performance. Dances before the kill, chants over the fire, the chewing of marrow paced to drumming on hollow logs. Even in scarcity, humans found rhythm, pattern, meaning. And then there was silence. When the last bit of dried meat had been rehydrated in snowmelt, when the final sliver of fat had been licked from the inside of a carved horn cup, there was often one piece left, the last bite. And in many sites, that bite was not consumed. It was buried, wrapped in hide, left at the edge of camp. A gesture, an offering to the season itself, or maybe to tomorrow. These practices, invisible in daily life, immortal in their echoes, reveal something profound. That even when survival was on the line, when starvation lurked at the edge of the cave, humans still made room for meaning. They still believed in more than the body. And this is what makes us more than animals. Not the tools, not the fire, but the choice to give when giving costs everything. The choice to sing while hungry, to bury food when starving, to grind the bones of a shared kill and cast them into the wind like prayers. It is easy to imagine Ice Age life as brutal, solitary, short. But around that fire, as the marrow was shared and the stories spun, it was something else. It was sacred. It was kin. It was culture. It doesn't happen all at once. Starvation begins in whispers, not screams. A skipped meal. Then two. A growl that becomes a knot, that becomes a fog, that becomes a silence. For Ice Age humans, this silence was not rare. It was seasonal, predictable, an annual reckoning written in ice and instinct. Because even the best hunters, the cleverest gatherers, the most prepared mothers and fire keepers could not summon food from frozen ground or vanished herds. There were always days, sometimes weeks, when there was simply nothing. And this is what it felt like. In the first 24 hours without food, your body doesn't panic, it pivots. Glucose, your brain's favorite fuel, starts to run dry, but your liver quietly releases reserves. Glycogen becomes sugar, becomes thought, becomes breath. You can still walk. You can still hunt. Your body remembers fasting. But that memory fades fast. By day 3, the liver's stores are empty. Your body begins to shift into a deeper gear, a mode humans evolved for long before agriculture, long before storage. Ketogenesis. Your liver now converts fat into ketones, molecules that can fuel the brain in glucose's absence. You might feel a strange clarity, a kind of cold focus. Some early humans may have even welcomed this, a sharper mind when the hunt was most desperate. But your muscles know the truth. They begin to waste, slowly first, imperceptibly. The heavy strength needed to drag a carcass, swing a flint axe, lift a child, it fades ounce by ounce. By week 2, if no fat or meat has arrived, the body turns on itself with ruthless efficiency. It breaks down muscle for amino acids. It recycles tissue. Skin grows loose. The gut slows. The heart too. And the mind. It starts to drift. Starvation is not just a physical decay. It's a psychological unraveling. In modern studies of long-term fasting and extreme calorie restriction, such as the 1944 Minnesota starvation experiment, subjects experienced not just weight loss but obsession. They dreamed of food, drew pictures of it, hoarded crumbs, some even chewed grass. Now place that same slow spiral inside the bitter cold of Ice Age January. Inside a wind-lashed cave with the howling of wolves outside and the absence of chewing inside. No broth, no bark, only memory. You begin to hallucinate. Some anthropologists believe early ritual visions, gods, ancestors, animals speaking through fire, may have emerged not just from mushrooms or myth, but from the brain in hunger. A starving cortex reaching for meaning, light, answers. Some called them visions. Others may have called them madness. And somewhere around week 3 or 4, if no food arrives, the organs begin to fail. Death by starvation is not dramatic, it is quiet. The heart slows, the immune system collapses, body temperature plummets, and in the Ice Age, where ambient temperatures already hovered well below zero, hypothermia often came first, a double death. But not everyone died. Some adapted. Because we're not the only animal to endure winter without food, bears hibernate, camels store fat in humps, Arctic foxes slow their metabolism, humans fast. Evidence from isotopic bone analysis, microscopic chemistry locked in ancient skeletons, shows seasonal fluctuations in nutrition. Nitrogen ratios suggest that early humans cycled in and out of protein-rich diets. In other words, planned starvation. Some Ice Age communities may have entered winter expecting food gaps and adapted their entire metabolism around it. They moved less, spoke less, burned less energy. Children's growth slowed. Menstrual cycles paused. It wasn't ideal, but it was survival. A kind of human hibernation. There are accounts from modern Arctic cultures, too, like the Inuit or Sami who practiced starvation rhythms in winter. Families would reduce activity to the bare minimum, sleep longer, stay in groups for warmth. They didn't just eat differently, they lived differently. But what about the unthinkable? What about when adaptation failed and the last frozen bone had been chewed hollow? What about cannibalism? It's one of the most persistent myths of the Paleolithic and one of the most controversial. At sites like Gough's Cave in England and Moulagursi in France, bones have been found with cut marks, fractures, and even tooth scoring that suggest human bodies were defleshed, deliberately. But was it ritual or desperation? Some evidence points to mortuary practices, respectful defleshing of the dead before burial. Others suggest moments of true famine, starvation, cannibalism, where families turned on their own species, perhaps even their own kin. What we do know is this: cannibalism was not common. It was not normal. It was not cultural. It was a signal, a red flare in the snow. A final choice made at the edge of death. So why do we tell this story? Because starvation, real starvation, reveals the absolute limits of the human machine. And yet, it also reveals something else, that even in this skeletal winter, people still endured, not always triumphantly, not always gracefully, but somehow, against odds and biology, they made it through. Not just because they were strong, but because they remembered. Remembered where to find the tubers that grew near the river, remembered how to scrape marrow from stone-broken bones, remembered which fungi fermented well and which turned fatal, remembered when to slow down and when to rise. Because the Ice Age wasn't conquered by muscle alone. It was endured by memory. The hunger didn't distribute itself evenly. It never does. In the long winters of the Ice Age, when rations dwindled and marrow bones had been cracked clean, survival wasn't just an individual act. It was a decision, made again and again, about who should eat and who should wait. And there was one rule, etched not in words but in instinct. The children must eat first. Not because they were weak, but because they were the future. In the muted light of a February morning inside a smoke-streaked cave, a mother lifts a shard of dried meat to her child's lips and watches him chew. She doesn't take a piece for herself. Not now, maybe not today. Around her, the tribe is silent. The fire is low. But this act, small, unspoken, is part of something far larger. Across continents and millennia, ethnographers have documented the same behavior in hunter-gatherers from the Arctic to the African savanna. When food runs short, hierarchies of need emerge, shaped not by dominance, but by potential. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, young children are fed first during droughts. Among the Inuit, elders often voluntarily step back from the pot, letting the young and reproductive-aged eat first. The logic is both brutal and beautiful. If someone must starve, let it be the ones whose time is already spent. In Paleolithic winters, this principle may have meant skipping meals entirely for the elderly. It meant the pregnant received more fat, the nursing mothers the first broth, the strongest hunters enough fuel to go again, because if they failed, everyone would fail. And it meant hard choices, quiet sacrifices. There are burial sites like Sungir in Ice Age Russia where children were interred with astonishing care. Ivory beads, spears, carved tools. Meanwhile, adult graves nearby were bare. This disparity suggests something more than grief. It suggests value placed on youth, on future, even in death and in life. In extreme scarcity, some cultures turn to what's now called geronticide, the killing or abandonment of the very old when food ran out. It's a taboo subject, shrouded in controversy. But whispers of it remain in Arctic oral histories and in the colder corners of anthropological archives. Yet more often, it wasn't violence. It was choice. The elder who quietly refused a second serving. The grandmother who sat by the fire, lips pressed closed, as her grandchild swallowed the last of the boiled marrow. This was love shaped by frost. Not the soft love of warmth and plenty, but the hard love of survival, of systems built not just to endure one winter, but hundreds of them. Because every Ice Age child carried more than hunger in their belly. They carried the entire genetic hope of a people. Their survival wasn't a luxury. It was a long-term strategy. And that meant the decisions around food, who received it, in what order, how much, became almost mathematical. A tribal economy of calories, an unspoken ethics of nutrition. But ethics didn't make it easier. Imagine sitting beside a sibling, both hungry, both shaking from cold, and realizing that one of you has the strength to hunt and the other doesn't. Imagine knowing in your gut that feeding one might save 5 lives next week, and feeding the other might save none. These were not theoretical problems. They were daily decisions, shaped by snow, by muscle, by time. And they left marks. Some archaeological sites show uneven wear on teeth, with children's molars ground smoother, suggesting they chewed more, ate more of the softened roots and meats. Some show bone lesions in elderly remains consistent with long-term malnutrition. These weren't isolated cases. They were patterns. Patterns that speak of quiet famine and quiet generosity. Because the most human thing in the Ice Age wasn't the spear or the fire or the cave art. It was the decision to let someone else eat first. In winter, survival isn't always about what you eat. It's about how you get to it. When the wind turns sharp and game grows scarce, every calorie counts, and every ounce of it becomes harder to reach. In this season of ice, the human mind sharpens like the tools it crafts, because hunger, more than anything, is a great innovator. And in the Ice Age, when food could be buried under snow, locked in bone, or frozen solid as stone, survival demanded invention. Start with the marrow. The long bones of large animals, mammoths, bison, reindeer, weren't just trash. They were vaults, sealed containers of fat-rich marrow dense with calories and warmth. But they didn't open easily. Early humans had no metal, no saws, only stone and desperation. So they made hammers from other bones. Femurs became blunt clubs. Stones were shaped into wedges. With a practiced swing, a hunter could shatter a leg bone clean in two, exposing the golden core inside. Archaeologists have found bone-crushing pits filled with fractured shafts and greasy residues, places where food was not hunted, but excavated. It's why, to this day, anthropologists can tell a human-killed carcass from a predator. Wolves strip flesh. Humans split bones. But what if the meat was still frozen? The Ice Age was not kind to timing. A kill left out for a few hours could freeze solid, becoming tougher than rawhide. Teeth alone weren't enough. So humans shaped flint knives not just for butchery but for chiseling flesh. These weren't delicate scalpels. They were ice tools used to flake frozen muscle into edible ribbons. In the permafrost zones of what is now Siberia and Alaska, some tribes learned to thaw meat with their own breath, softening strips slowly before eating. Others used heated stones, placed near or inside chunks of meat to melt the frost from within. A slow, patient alchemy of fire and hunger. And when even wood grew scarce, when the tundra offered no trees, and the snow swallowed kindling, humans improvised again. They dug earth pits, lined them with hot rocks, and laid their food inside, wrapped in hide, covered in snow, buried beneath soil. The heat trapped within would steam and cook over hours, sometimes days. No open flame, no wood, just thermal memory borrowed from the earth. It was early pit cooking, and in some places it still is. Tools evolved not just to find food, but to stretch it. Large shoulder blades became shovels to dig through snow. Ivory rods were shaped into ice picks, used to cut holes into rivers to fish even in the deepest winter. Spears were redesigned with barbed tips to hold onto slippery prey dragged from water. And later, antler toggles were used as harpoon locks, turning rawhide cords and bone into retrieval devices, not just weapons, but fishing systems. This was the age before agriculture, before convenience, before surplus. Every meal had to be earned, engineered, extracted. And the act of cooking itself, that was technology too. When wood was abundant in autumn, tribes dried and stored it. But by late winter, much was gone. So they turned to heated stones, flint or granite warmed by fire, then dropped into water-filled stomachs or hide bladders to boil stews. A primitive, yet ingenious way to make broth when pots didn't exist. Sometimes the broth came not just from meat, but from the bones themselves, split, scraped, and simmered until they yielded their collagen-rich oils. It wasn't gourmet. It was grease and life, warmth and fat extracted from what seemed empty. What looks now like primitive tech was, then, the cutting edge of Ice Age culinary science. Because in the end, winter wasn't just endured with fire. It was endured with tools of hunger, objects shaped not by luxury or curiosity, but by a precise desperation, a need to make the land yield food when the land said no. And in that friction, between human will and a frozen earth, something remarkable happened. Ingenuity emerged. The same hand that gutted a reindeer also shaped the flint to do it faster. The same woman who boiled broth in a mammoth skull may have discovered, quite accidentally, how heat could clean bone, sterilize it, and make it into a tool itself. Necessity didn't just create survival strategies. It sparked innovation loops where every challenge became a lesson and every tool led to a new kind of thinking. And that thinking didn't stop with stone. It laid the first logic for every blade, every pot, every technology we'd later invent. Because long before the plow or the printing press, humans were inventing things with just two resources: hunger and ice. It begins not with a sunrise, but with a sound. A single drop of water falling from the icicle-strewn roof of a cave, then another, and another. The drip becomes a rhythm becomes a stream, and suddenly the silence of winter is broken, not by voices, but by the slow, quiet unraveling of cold. The thaw has come, and with it life cautious, tentative, and starving. For months the earth had held its breath. Snow locked the forests. Rivers turned to stone. Stomachs tightened. Spirits frayed. But now invisible changes stir beneath the frost. Roots twitch. Tree buds swell with stored sugar. A single blade of green pushes up through dirty snow, and somewhere in the skeletal remains of a winter camp, someone sees it. A sprout small, alive, edible. And it is not just food, it is a promise. The first animals return before the warmth fully settles. Migrating birds, thin and sharp-eyed, circle meltwater pools. A hare darts across slush, white coat beginning to brown. And in the rush of runoff streams, cold and fast, trout glint beneath the surface. A boy, ribs showing, breath-heavy, wades in barefoot, spear raised. A flick, a stab, a cry. The first fish of the season, pulled from snowmelt and mud. It will be shared, reverently, the skin blackened over fire, the bones set aside for tools or broth, not because there isn't more to come, but because for weeks there hasn't been anything. This first bite of spring is not a feast, it is a reintroduction. And refeeding after starvation is a dangerous dance. Modern medicine now recognizes what Paleolithic survivors already understood in their bones: refeeding syndrome. After long-term fasting or near starvation, the body's metabolism must reignite slowly. Flood it with too much too fast, sugars, fats, protein, and systems begin to fail. The ancients didn't know the names of electrolytes or insulin, but they knew the symptoms: bloated bellies, weakness after eating, the strange way death could arrive not during famine but during recovery. So they began with what they had always trusted: broth. Warm liquid drawn from cracked bones, enriched with collagen, soft fat, and a trace of minerals. Easy to digest, life without shock. After broth came greens, bitter, wild, fibrous, like nettles, sorrel, and watercress gathered near melt streams. Their vitamin C was medicine against scurvy. Their chew was a return to texture, to variety. And only then, slowly, came meat. Not the fat-rich cuts of winter kills, but young spring prey, birds, hares, and fish. Leaner, faster, but enough to restart the cycle. The hunger began to loosen its grip, and with it, a different hunger rose, one not of stomach, but of spirit. Because the thaw wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Early humans marked spring not only with food, but with ritual, ancient acts of gratitude and memory. In the Dordogne caves of France, some of the oldest paintings we know, mammoths, ibex, bison, were made in ochre and charcoal just after winter's end, when the caves grew warm enough to return. These weren't idle doodles. They were acts of renewal, of reimagining the world as alive again. Some tribes painted animals they had not yet seen, as if invoking them through pigment and hope. Others danced. Circles formed around fires, with drums of stretched hide and voices lifted in cracked but joyous sound. First kill feasts emerged, shared meals celebrating the return of plenty, but also honoring the ones who hadn't survived. Bones were burned, names were whispered, the old cycle resumed. Even the children, now thinner, older, took part, and perhaps it was in their survival that the greatest meaning was found. The tribe had made it. Not without loss, not without scars, but through the intelligence of preservation, the sacrifice of rationing, and the quiet courage of enduring the dark, they had arrived at green again. The spring foods were not just meals, they were medicine. Not only for the body, but for memory. Each bite of sour leaf, each sip of fish broth reconnected the living with the land and with the cycle they were caught inside. Death, hunger, thaw, renewal. It was never a straight line. It was always a circle. And in that circle, the people of the Ice Age found their rhythm again. The Ice Age may have ended 10,000 years ago, but its shadow still walks beside us. Not in the snow, not in the mammoths, not in the caves, but in us. In our cravings, in our choices, in the quiet tug behind every impulse to eat more, store more, hold on, just in case the cold comes again. Because somewhere inside our cells, our blood, our genes, our biology still believes the winter is coming. Take a walk through any modern supermarket and you'll see it, not stone tools or cracked marrow bones, but a deeper residue, the ghost of famine. Shelves are lined with sugar, fat, and salt. Bright colors beckon, instant calories, easy dopamine. Evolution didn't design us for restraint, it designed us for survival. And survival, for hundreds of thousands of years, meant one thing: eat when you can or starve when you can't. Our ancestors didn't have food security. They had food scarcity. They faced seasons where snow buried the land and meat ran dry. They didn't know when the next hunt would succeed, when the next root could be dug. So the bodies that lasted were the ones that could adapt, that craved dense calories, stored fat efficiently, and slowed down in the absence of food. That legacy of adaptation through hunger is not just myth, it's written in our genes. Start with ACTN3, a gene that's been nicknamed the survival gene. It's involved in fast-twitch muscle fibers, crucial for explosive movement. But more importantly, variants of this gene helped ancient humans cope with extreme environments, especially cold, famine, and endurance-based hunting. Populations that faced Ice Age winters more intensely show a higher frequency of the ACTN3 variant that favors resilient muscle conservation, especially during starvation. And that's just one piece of the code. Our bodies, remarkably, have enzymes tailored for survival food, things most animals would reject. The enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase, for instance, breaks down ethanol, a byproduct of natural fermentation. Why do we even have this? Because fermented food was often safer in winter than fresh. In the absence of refrigeration, Ice Age humans likely consumed mildly fermented fruit, meat, and grains. Those who could digest it and survive it passed on that trait. Even our love of sweetness is a relic. In the wild, sweetness meant energy, fast calories, ripe fruit, safe sugar. When a wild fig was found in the cold season, you didn't walk past it, you devoured it. Our ancestors who were more sensitive to sweetness, who found it pleasurable, were more likely to survive. Today, that once vital signal now competes with modern food systems that exploit it. Candy aisles, corn syrup, sugared drinks. Our hunger system was forged in famine. Now it feasts and doesn't know when to stop. And then there's fat, that ancient sacred fuel. Modern culture demonizes it, but the Ice Age revered it. Fat was warmth, energy, survival. Our ancestors evolved a powerful preference for it. The brain itself is nearly 60% fat. It craves lipids for insulation and function. And body fat, once a precious storage bank of energy, is still prized by our cells. Even our hormones, leptin and ghrelin, evolved to encourage eating when food was plenty and conserving energy when it was. Today, those same hormones still govern our cravings, but they don't know the supermarket shelves are always full. Perhaps the most haunting trace of the Ice Age lies not in what we eat, but in how we endure not eating. Fasting isn't a modern wellness trend. It's a survival adaptation written deep in our biochemistry. When food vanished in winter, the body had to find ways to conserve and recycle. And so it learned to shift to ketosis, burning fat instead of glucose, downregulate metabolism, trigger autophagy, recycling damaged cells for energy. These are not hacks. They're ancient fallback systems, polished over tens of thousands of years of intermittent famine. When you skip a meal and your stomach grumbles, your body isn't panicking. It's remembering. It's waking up a system built by cold caves and long winters. But here's the paradox. What once saved us is now slowly killing us. In a world where hunger is rare and abundance is constant, our ancient instincts become vulnerabilities. The craving for fat becomes obesity. The love of sugar becomes diabetes. The hoarding instinct becomes compulsive consumption. Our cells still think the mammoth might vanish tomorrow, but the mammoth is now processed, packaged, and delivered in 30 minutes or less. And the result is a species out of sync with its design. Our biology is still in the Ice Age, but our environment has leapt ahead. This mismatch between ancient hunger and modern food is the core of the modern metabolic crisis. It's not weakness, it's not moral failure, it's evolutionary mismatch. We are hunter-gatherers with smartphones, cavemen with takeout, bodies built for famine trying to survive a feast. Even the marketing we respond to, bright colors, crunch, creaminess, taps into that same Ice Age wiring. Food companies don't create desires. They exploit old ones, ones that were once essential for survival. So when you feel the urge to snack late at night, to stock your pantry like a storm is coming, it's not just habit. It's memory, a memory older than your lifetime. And yet in that memory, there's wisdom too. Modern research into intermittent fasting, keto diets, and low glycemic eating is essentially a rediscovery of ancient biology. We are beginning to understand what our ancestors always knew, that how we eat must match how we were built, that long gaps between meals are not broken metabolism, they're a return to rhythm, that a high-fat, low-carb winter diet is not a trend, it's a blueprint from the past. Science is finally catching up to instinct. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a mirror, a reflection not of who we are now, but who we were, and how deeply that past still lives inside us. We are the descendants of the hungry, the ones who made it through winters that would break most modern minds, who scraped marrow from bone, fermented grains in darkness, and sang to the first sprout of spring. Every craving, every late-night snack, every fast we attempt, every bite we regret. It's all part of the same story. A story written in the DNA of the hungry. It is silent now. Not the silence of peace, but the thick, breathing hush of snow, endless, white and listening. The kind that blankets mountains, bones, and stories alike. The kind of silence our ancestors knew too well. They survived it not by waiting, but by remembering. Remembering where the roots lay buried under the frost. Remembering the sound of migrating herds before the first snowflake fell. Remembering how to pack marrow-rich femurs in ice, wrapped in hide, marked with bone. But more than anything, they remembered each other. Because winter in the Ice Age was never just about the cold. It was about who you shared it with. For 12 chapters, we've followed the lifeline of food through a world of scarcity. Smoked mammoth ribs, underground caches, fat-fueled fires, and bitter tubers dug from frozen soil. We've peeled back layers of survival strategy, evolution, and endurance. But beneath all of it, behind every tool, every kill, every boiled bone, there was a truth far older than language. No one survives winter alone. The caves tell us this if we know how to listen. Hands etched on limestone walls, not just one but many. Children's palms beside elders. Spirals and animals, yes, but also circles. Circles like fire pits. Circles like community. Like memory passed down by glowing embers. We forget how close the edge was. How a single failed hunt could mean starvation. How a missed migration or a spoiled cache could unravel an entire bloodline. And yet they survived, again and again, for tens of thousands of years. They survived because they planned, they preserved, they adapted. They learned to read the signs: a cracked hoof print, a change in wind, the first scent of snow in the air. They sang while working marrow from bone. They fermented grains when game grew scarce. They rationed. They remembered who needed the last bite more. Their bodies changed, their minds sharpened, their culture deepened. Because when food becomes the difference between life and death, every meal becomes sacred. And still, something else happened, something miraculous. In the darkness of that hunger, they made beauty. They painted reindeer in ochre and charcoal. They carved figurines out of tusk and stone. They danced. They told stories while the fat crackled in bone broth. They whispered names into the flames. Even in scarcity, perhaps especially in scarcity, they reached for something higher than survival. They made meaning. And that meaning somehow made it to us. We forget so much now. We forget what hunger really feels like: not boredom, not craving, but the sharp ache in the gut, the slowing heartbeat, the bone-deep exhaustion when the body turns on itself to survive. We forget that the human diet once depended not on choice, but on what the world would allow. That meat was not guaranteed. That every bite of fat was a small miracle. That grains had to be ground by hand, soaked, fermented, made safe by patience. We forget that winter wasn't a season, it was a gauntlet, a test, a proving ground for ingenuity, generosity, and the long arc of memory. But we also remember, deep down, even if we don't speak its name. We remember in small ways. In how we gather around a fire or even a stove like it's something ancient. In the way we instinctively divide food, passing plates before ourselves. In how we still mark seasons with feasts, harvests, solstices, the first fish of spring. We remember in our cravings for fat when we're cold, for sweetness when we're tired, in our habit of storing, freezing, preparing just in case, in our reverence for shared meals, even now. And perhaps most powerfully, we remember in our empathy, in the ache we feel for others in need, in the way we instinctively want to feed a child first, in the stories we tell of sacrifice, the elder who eats less, the parent who saves the last piece. That instinct is not culture, it's inheritance. We are the children of survivors, the descendants of the fire circle. Today, we live in abundance, at least some of us do, but our biology still whispers stories written in frost. Of desperate hunts, of buried caches, of hunger that taught us how to be human. And maybe, just maybe, we still carry the best parts of that time. Resilience, ingenuity, care for the tribe. Because food was never just calories, it was memory, it was hope passed from hand to hand. It was life shared. So imagine this. You're standing in the mouth of a cave 20,000 years ago. The wind howls behind you. Your bones ache from the hunt. You're wrapped in hides that still smell of smoke and ash. In your hands, you hold a strip of smoked reindeer rib, charred at the edges. You tear off a bite. It's chewy, salty, a little bitter. It tastes like ash, like blood, like effort. It tastes like desperation. And like life. You turn. Behind you, others wait, hands outstretched, eyes tired, bellies hollow. You pass the food. The circle tightens. The fire crackles. And winter, for a moment, retreats.